I thought I would try something a little bit different in this video. In a recent one, I talked about, I don't know how recent it was, could have been months ago, but I talked about, woodworking being a step-by-step process in that, okay, you take your complex projects and you break it down into the steps, and, it's easy enough to master a step is what that means. So in this, I'm going to build a box. It's a small project box. I also talked in a recent video about building a preamp for some test equipment that I'm going to be working on, and you need a place to put the parts. So I'm going to build a small wooden box to put that in. Now the box itself is fairly complex. It's not overly complex, but then again, it's not ultra simple either. And I'm going to be making it from this piece of 2x6 that I got out of my scrap wood closet down there. It's about, this really doesn't matter. Although, the materials you have limit what you can do. This is 12 inches long, 5.5 inches wide, like a standard 2x6, and it's 1.5 inches thick. And it's a softwood, it's actually spruce. Okay? Now, I have other ones in there, but I picked out this one because it has the least number of defects. There are a couple of knots up on this end. I don't think I'll need anything up on this end though. You really want to avoid knots whenever possible when you're making something that you're not going to incorporate the knots into the look of it. Okay? Because in woodworking terms, these things are considered as defects. Now okay, the one thing that I have, like if I'm speaking to you and you're a beginning woodworker, the single biggest thing I have over you, well, I have two biggest things, actually. I already have the ability built up to use the tools. That's the first one. And also I have the material understanding. I know how to work with this. And this is something it can be taught, but it would take a long time. The better approach is to go out to wherever you're going to be doing the work and start doing it. And then you'll come to a material understanding as you work with it. Also, there are things you can read about it, the properties of wood that you should understand. So I have this here, and I want to get every part of the box from this. All right. And my first step is to cut it. Okay, let me talk about the box again for a second, all right? The box is, I'm going to be doing all this on the table saw as well, and I'm going to try to do it all live, like in one cut. So this will be the closest you're going to get to a live video from me. I want to get all the parts from this single piece of wood, and the parts that I need are basically two thicknesses. I need 1/2 inch for the size of the box, and I need 1/4 inch for the top, the bottom, and the front and the back of the box. So the first thing I need to do is figure out how I'm going to get that 1/4 inch piece for the top and bottom out of here, because that's the biggest pieces that are in there. The sides are thicker, but the bigger pieces are those top and bottom panels. So the sensible thing to do is to figure out which way the grain of the wood has to run for those to be, to work well. And the grain of the wood, since I'm using solid wood, has to run side to side. It has to glue onto the side panels, the pieces that make up the sides, so that the grain is going across. That'll be the way that it's strongest. If you glue it the other way with the grain going front to back, it'll break in half. I talked about the properties briefly, those properties of wood in a previous video on this channel, actually. So you can go watch that if you don't understand what I'm talking about. The grain is going here this way. This is the strength axis across it. Okay. This is the way it's strongest across the grain like that. With the grain, it will split. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut some off both sides. so that I wind up with a piece, like a block in the middle here, that is wide enough to go from the front of the box to the back of the box, which is 3.5 inches. So my piece is 5.5. I need to cut about 1 inch off each side. And that'll be the first thing I do. I'm gonna raise the blade, it's already up. And I'm gonna take my piece of wood and put it on the table saw to see which way it's like how it's like it needs to sit flat as possible. Now this has a little bit of a rock here, but nothing there. That means a little bit of a twist, not a big deal. But if I flip it over the other way, it rocks, you know, this way. It's less stable because the wood is actually cupped a little bit. Now, if you have a jointer, if you have more tools at your disposal, you could run this face over the jointer and make it absolutely flat. That would be the best starting point, but we're not going to do that. First thing I'm going to do is I set my saw to 4.5, and I'm going to make a cut. Now you saw that? That's where it was pinching on the back of the blade. It started to kick back. And I got a comment recently saying that I'm an idiot if I think I can stop kickback while it's happening or before it happens. Well, you just saw it on camera. I stopped the kickback, okay? And the reason why I was kicking back are those knots that are on the back. So really a better strategy would have been to cut this end off and take away that stress that's built up over here because of those knots, but I didn't do that. I'm going to set my saw to 3.5 and make another cut, and we'll probably see that again. No, not as much stress on that side of the wood, okay? See, the knot is further, like closer to the back. And so, less of a problem. Okay, so I've got my piece that's gonna make up the parts that I'm concentrating on, which is the top and bottom. Now I need to cut this to 1/4 inch thick, and the way I'm gonna do that on my table saw is raise the blade up halfway through the material. And I'm just gonna hold that up there. This blade is an 8.25, 8.5, so it's smaller than a 10-inch blade. So that's another consideration. If you're using a saw with a smaller blade, it's going to limit how deep you can cut. So you're going to have to adjust your project to suit. I really need a pencil here, so I'll get one. All right, so top of the blade here. Flip the work over. I can visually see that it's more than half, so that's good. Now the face that I had down during the cut is going to, I just had to make sure I was still recording, is going to go against the fence, all right? And the objective here is to hold it tight against the fence. Now here's a given. The given is that your equipment is tuned up. Your fence, a table saw fence, needs to be square to the table saw top. And the blade needs to be at 90 degrees or 0 degrees, whatever it reads on your saw, when it's upright, completely upright. Otherwise, what you're going to get is a cut that's either shaped like this, as in it's almost like a roof, or it's going to cut in and it'll be thinner in the middle. Okay, so tune up your equipment. I should say another thing about table saws. You can take the cheapest table saw and improve it an order of magnitude by buying a good blade. So if you have your $100 table saw, buy a $100 blade and put it on that table saw. It makes it way better. And it has to be sharp. You need sharp blade, good quality. That makes a bad table saw. I'm pointing to mine like it's bad, it's not. into a really good one. So I'm gonna move my fence over to 1/4 inch. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one of these offcuts here, and I'm going to cut in slightly and see if it actually is a 1/4 inch. Not that that really matters for this, because you can adjust, but I want to make sure that what I'm getting here, or I could actually just measure what I have here. That says 3.5, so this should be exactly a 1/4 inch. And I like to use the tape so that I'm not hooking it over the end, because there's some error that can happen there. I'd rather hold it up against the thing and look at that. And I can see it's just slightly more than a 1/4 inch, maybe a 64th. Okay, so room for sanding, we'll call that. Okay, so I'm gonna put the flattest side up against the fence, and I think that's this side over here. And put it up against the fence. I want to get my push stick so that people won't freak out at me. Pull up my sleeves to make sure there's nothing dangling for the blade to catch on, and make the cut. See, once again, I was running into that binding situation. So I cut in, I could feel the saw slow down, I could hear the saw slow down. I pulled it back. And when you pull it back and push it ahead, it recuts the kerf. It makes it wider where it's binding. And then I did that again just to make sure, and then I pulled through and got it done. Now, I'm going to cut them to size, the top and bottom panel from this, and I'm going to make them, I'm just winging this kind of to get the size. I'm going to make them 3 inches. So I get a 3-inch panel, a 3-inch panel, and that will leave me with a piece that's 6 inches long that I can get my front and back from. So say top panel, bottom panel, and then split down the middle, front and back panel. Okay? Which are actually less than what I need here. So I'll easily get those 4 pieces from this piece that I just cut. And what I have left over is this piece here to cut the parts for the side. Okay? And so the parts for the side are 1/2 inch. And I think, yeah, this width that I have here is wide enough for all of the parts. It's a little bit more than 1 1/8. So what I can do is I can lower my blade, reset my fence to 1/2 inch, and cut the parts that I need for, I need 4, right? I need 4 top, bottom, on both sides of the box. And I can easily get that probably from 2 pieces of this. So I'm gonna have lots of material left over. I just need to determine which side is better to cut it from. I think this side over here is better, because remember, this is the side that had less stress when I cut it before. So reset the blade to 1/2 inch, lower it down. Very important. I see guys using with the blade. Don't do that. Okay, don't have the blade all the way up. Have it just so that it's cutting through the material that you're cutting. All right, the less it's sticking up, the less that it can cut you. That's the way to look at it. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this edge up tight against the fence. I'm not really trying to hold it down tight to the table saw top. I'm looking to make that, like the 2 sides of this piece parallel. I'll make that cut. So I can put this over here. I also had this other stuff that I could use. I could have gotten at least 2 boxes out of here. So what I have are the pieces for the size, the final width. I don't have to do anything with that. When I compare one to the other side, they're even because my saw is well tuned up here. Okay, if you take one and flip it over and you feel that on one edge, one is thicker than the other, that means there's something wrong here. Or if you wound up with a piece that's thinner or thicker in the middle when you cut this one, you have something wrong as well. So now these are taller than they need to be. That would be a box that's 2 3/8, and I'm shooting for a box that's going to be 2. But what I want to do is I want to have, say, the top with the parts for the side a little taller than the bottom, because the screws are going to come up through the bottom and into the top to hold the thing together. And I don't really want to use long screws. I want to use screws that are like 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches. I don't want to have to be trying to dig for, 2-inch screws this side, because I don't have them. You want to use small screws to put together a small box. So I'll be using number 6 screws rather than, say, number 8 screws. So I still need to cut both pieces, even though this one's close to the final size that I have. And that's because these 2 sides that I have over here are probably not 90 degrees to these faces that I already cut. Okay, because I took the piece and I pushed it up against the fence to get these 2 sides parallel. That means that if it lifted off the table saw top, which it did, and then these sides are not 90 degrees to these faces that I already cut. And if you go back to what I said before, the piece was cupped. So this is what I'm dealing with, that cup. All right. So what I have right now in the shape, if you look at the end of it, it's almost like a parallelogram. Okay. And what you're looking for is a perfect rectangle with 90-degree corners. So I'm going to take my tape and measure this piece right here and look at it and see what's straight enough. I can hold it up against the fence to do that. And I'm going to cut a little bit off this side over here. So I'm going to lower my blade again. Don't be lazy, lower your blade. Okay? And move the fence over until I'm just taking a very small amount off here. I'm going to go a little bit more, just on the safe side. And you want to put the convex, the side that's cupped in, against the fence. You don't want to put the other side because it won't have enough contact. Okay? Convex side up against or concave. I keep getting those confused. You want to put the concave, cave being caved in, up against the fence. And that way you'll have a point of contact in the front and the back. Whereas the other way, you'll only have a point of contact in the middle and it'll rock and it'll be bad. Okay? So I'm going to do that and make the cut. Okay, so what I have are 2 edges that are correct. They're straighter than they were to begin with because I made that cut. And they're also 90 degrees to the corners, like these corners are 90 degrees. Now I need to flip both around and put that side that I just cut up against the fence for the next cut. Except the next cut is going to be the final size cut for both pieces. For the wider one that I'm going to be using for the top of the box, I'll just, push this over slightly. So I'm just shaving a small amount off, and then I'll be able to cut this one down to whatever it takes to make up the 2 inches that I need. Okay, what I have left here is when I put the 2 together and I measure it, I have 2 1/8, so I need to cut 1/8 of an inch off of this one, and when I measure it, I see it's 1 and like 16th or something. You know what? I'm just gonna move this over to 15/16. That'll be good enough, because if I'm using 1.5-inch screws, the screw will go through the 15/16, and then you'll have that extra. It's not a full 9/16, it's probably closer to a half, but that would be adequate penetration into the piece that goes on top. Okay, so make that cut. See how close I was, just guessing. Oh, bang on. Well, I got no close-up, so I could be telling a fib, but no, it's close. Close enough. If you're building something, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be machine shop precision. All right, this is wood, after all. Wood has give. It has tolerance. Okay? Something that a lot of people don't have these days, tolerance. Anyway, so I got my side pieces cut to the final dimensions. I've got my top and bottom, my stock for the top and bottom ready. I can move the fence out of the way, yes, and get my mini table saw sled and take my stop block off and put it on the back out of the way so I don't lose it, and I'm not going to be using it here. Take that and put it in the miter slot, and I'm going to work on the top panels first. And like I said, I need 2 that are exactly the same size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure over a bit more than the 3 inches that I said I wanted. So I'll say 3 1/8, and mark that, and that will be my first cut. Okay, I'm gonna cut through that, and then I'll have this piece and what's left over here. Then I could take this piece, flip it around so that both the edges that I cut line up on this end, and then I can cut both pieces together to the final length, which is 3 inches. Okay, once again, lower your blade. Don't forget to lower your blade. Flip it around, line it up. Actually, probably going to work better the other way because there's a slight bow in the material. And the reason why I'm not worried about that is because this material is really flexible across the grain, like this way. I'm gonna cut a piece off. Hang on, let me illustrate something. Now I've lost track of which side I cut. I think it's that one. It should be that one. Yeah, it is. What I was talking about before, about the grain direction, okay? How you want it to go side to side across the box and not front to back, because it'll be weak that way. Here, I can demonstrate that with this. It's impossible for me to break this piece this way. If the grain was oriented the other way, I probably could, but it's impossible for me to break it this way because it's too strong. But the other way, you see it breaks right through with very little effort, okay? Like that. I can get down to this small even, which would be close to what I was talking about, and even then, I can break it. But there's no way, there's no way that I can develop enough force here to break that the other way. That's the importance of grain. Alrighty, so I'm going to mark on here the 3 inches final dimension that I need. And I'm using the end of the tape. I told you not to do that. but I'm using it here because really it doesn't matter that much if it's actually 3 inches. The important thing is that it matches the one on the bottom. So you wind up with a box that is, you know, the same width on the top as it is on the bottom. So I put these together and I very carefully line them up like so. And then I take them and I make that cut. And check to make sure my blade is high enough. And it's not, so I'll just bump that up a little bit and line up my cut to begin with. Sorry, no close-ups. I know you're used to seeing close-ups, but trying to do this all with one camera that doesn't shut off after 30 minutes, and you know. Anyway, so make the cut. Top and bottom panel, exactly the same size, exactly square, or as square as they need to be, or as square as your mini table saw fence is, ready to go. These parts are finished, other than some sanding. All right, but I'm going to save the sanding until after the box is put together. So those are done. They're relatively simple. Okay, we're going to get more complex now with the front and back. And the front and back needs to be just, I can't remember, it's just slightly less than this. Because what the front and the back do in this box is they hook into a dado in the side panels so that you can just slip the front and back into each end of the box and easily remove it when you need to. So you want to drill holes in it for switches or a jack or something, you pull the panel out, you bring it to your drill press or whatever, you drill your hole, you put it back in. All right, it's not glued in, it's just held in there with those dados. So I'm gonna make it so that, I'm gonna do a little bit on the fly figuring here. So my box, the top is, the top and bottom are 3 inches wide. And plus you got an eighth on like past that. So it's going to be 3 1/4 inches. And this is the way I like to do it. I like to take a block and just mark that out. 3 1/4. All right. And then the side panels are 1/2 inch. So I'll mark those. I'll just come in 1/2 inch on each end like that. So what I've got are 3 marks in the end. Right, this is a side panel, this is a side panel, this is the total width, and in between is what you're going to have for the front panel, front and back panel, except they need to be longer than that. They need to stick into the sides by about 1/8 of an inch. Let's say 1/8 of an inch, actually. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my tape, I'm lining the 1 inch mark up with that mark over here on this end. Not the end of the thing, but that mark I made 1/2 inch from the end. I'm lining that up and I'm gonna mark 1/8 of an inch just inside of that. So here's what you got here. So this is actually 3/8 of an inch from the end. I hope I'm not confusing people that are metric only, but you can kind of see what I'm doing here. It's going this way. It's actually getting longer. You have an opening this size. The panel that you're gonna put in there has to be longer, because it's gonna key into the pieces that make up the side. So I do the same on the other end. I mark 1/8 of an inch there. And then I take my 1 inch mark and I line it up with that one that's in there and the one that's out there, the two that I just drew, and I get a total length of 2 1/2. Okay, so I could have calculated this just by measuring the distance between the sides, which is 2 1/4, and then add 1/8 on each end, gives me 2 1/2. But this is a really good visual way to do it, and the one that I would recommend to keep you from messing up. Okay, because it's very easy to mess up in woodworking. There's this expression, measure twice and cut once. Well, you want to do little tricks like this that help you to visualize what you need. Like if you see 2 1/2, it's easier to remember. Okay, So 2.5 inches is my total length for the front and back. And so I'm going to mark that on this piece right here. And remember, this is the end that's no good over here. It's kind of, or is it? Actually, it doesn't look bad. So, you know, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to mark. First thing I need to determine is which end did I just cut. Okay, a square would be good, but I can also use my table saw fence. Bring that over and put that there. Flip it over and put that there. They're both square, so it really doesn't matter. Anyway, so I'm going to mark 2.5 on here, like so. And if this is just slightly off, you can make the thing, like you'll make the cuts to a certain depth. And if it doesn't, like if it's not deep enough, you can always cut them a little bit deeper. So don't stress over making everything perfect, but it has to be longer. That's the important thing. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with a narrower box. All right, so I'll make that cut. So front and back panel. Okay. Now, before I cut these to width, I'm not going to cut these to width because I don't know exactly the width they need to be. What I need to do is get the majority of the box put together so that I can actually measure the distance, because that's another trick to avoiding messing up. Unless you have plans to go by, like detailed dimension plans that you can say, this is how wide this part needs to be, you're better off to do it this way. Even then, you're better off to do it this way because, okay, the plans doesn't allow for inaccuracies in your own cuts. Okay, so you cut these two panels, they're close to 1/4 inch thick, very close, but if you just take two of them, put them together and measure with tape, you can see it's more than 1/2 inch. And you can like measure with calipers and you'll see definitely it's more than 1/2 inch. So they're not 1/4 inch. So wait until you have the actual thing put together so you can measure the distance on the inside. Okay, this thing that I just did is not the same thing. All right, so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to cut that rabbet on each end, and that's halfway through the material and a little bit, say 1/8 inch in. I'm just going to take my pencil and draw that to show what I'm talking about. Okay, you want to remove the corner of the piece on both sides on the same side so that you create a rabbet that fits in that slot in the side. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to lower my blade again, way down, and make sure that this is actually the piece that I need, because I have two pieces. Yeah, this is the piece that I'm going to cut. This will be my sample, because this is another thing that you need to get into. Samples. Always cut a sample when you have an important operation like this to do. Always cut a sample and sneak up on the final fit. All right, so I'm taking my blade and I'm seeing that's pretty close. I'm gonna move my fence over. Now this is not right for that because this piece is actually narrower, but what I'm looking for here is the depth of the blade. That's what I'm interested in mostly. So I'm gonna take my piece and I'm gonna use my fingers to hold a small piece like this. My fingers are well away from the blade. The blade is not sticking up high enough to actually cut me deeply. Like I'm not gonna lose a limb here. So you get better control of the workpiece when you hold it with your fingers, especially something small like this. You're gonna run it through the saw. Okay? So it's all about control. Now I can measure how much I got left after that cut. You can see that. Okay, that's that rabbet cut that I'm talking about. And that depth, it can come up a little bit. I'm just gonna bump it up a very small amount and make the cut again. and measure it again. And here I can see I have exactly 1/8 of an inch, which is what I want. I want 1/8 of an inch. I want it to go in the center. I want to have 1/8 of an inch over here and 1/8 of an inch there. Okay? So that looks good. Now for my piece that I need to cut, I'm going to move the fence over so that it is actually 2 3/8. The total width of the piece that I have here is 2.5. That means that I'll be leaving 1/8 of an inch, or I'll be moving in 1/8 of an inch, which is what I want to do. Okay. Actually, I'm going to come a little bit further, because this front and back panel doesn't have to be flush with the sides when it goes in. It has to be in that groove, right? It doesn't have to bottom out in the groove. It doesn't have to come up tight against the side panel, like I said. If there can be a little gap there, it'll look fine. I've done it before, and it did. So take my word for it. But you want it to fit, and you want to be able to take it out easily and put it back in. It can't be too sloppy, otherwise it's not going to work properly, but you want a little bit of play there. Okay, so I'm going to make the cut, and I'm going to make it on both sides. All right, I'm going to cut this edge, flip the thing over, cut this edge, because they're exactly the same. Okay? One, two. Now you can see what I have left over, because this is a very thin kerf blade. It's cutting like a 16th. So I still have some material here left over. I'm going to move. You can break that off like I almost did, or you can move the fence over a 1/16 of an inch or so and make another cut. Here's another important thing. Is that you hold the thing down tight against the top of the table saw, because if your part is cupped at all, it's not going to cut as deep in the middle. So you need to keep that pushed down tight again in the middle, right? And that's the way you want to cut it. That's the way you want to orient your stock when you're cutting something like this, so that the cup is facing up, so that you can push it down the middle, right? If it's thin enough to do that, which this definitely is. Like I said, I could break this, I could snap this in half, even with my thoughts. Okay, it's that weak. So front and back panel, conquered. You know, what is this, step number 10 or something? But that's how simple it is. You do it step by step by step by step. As long as you have a grasp on what you're doing, the operations are simple. It's just avoiding making mistakes and doing things in the right sequence. Okay, so I've got that done. I've got my top panels done, top and bottom panels done. So I'm going to take those and put them over there. I'm going to work on the sides next. And already we can see that the sides are way too long, because my box from front to back is 3.5. These only need to be 3.5 inches long. So I think that's what I'll do first, cut those. Actually, I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to cut the rabbet in the top and bottom, you know, the side parts for the top and the side parts for the bottom. I'm going to cut that rabbet that receives the top and bottom panel, because that's what holds the box together. You take this top and bottom panel and you glue it to those side pieces in that rabbet. And that does two things. It adds a lot of strength to the union. Like if you take this and you glue it to the side like this, this has no strength, because this is end grain, and up against that grain, it has absolutely no strength. Okay, very much like the panel you break here, no strength. You need to let it in a rabbet so that it fits in there, and you have face grain glued to face grain. Okay, that's where your strength comes from. Even though this is a cross grain glue joint that I talked about before many times, the wood expands and contracts on this piece, say from front to back, whereas it doesn't do it on this one. But what we're counting on here is the thinness of this piece right here and the strength of the glue that I'm going to use to put this together. So you take this piece and you glue it on there. The glue will stop this from expanding and contracting because it's thin and because it's not big. It's not going to expand and contract that much to begin with, and the glue is really strong and it will hold it and stop it from expanding. You can get away with that here because the parts are thin and they're small. So let's cut that rabbet and stop talking about it. So once again, I'm going to make a sample. I'm going to call up one of my pieces over here. The thing has to be 1/4 inch deep and it needs to be 3/8 of an inch wide because you want good contact with the thing. Now you can just, the other way is to not do this and just glue that right on there like that. Okay? And that will be just as strong and that will work just as well. Okay? Line up with the side over here, glue it onto that. But that leaves that end grain exposed, doesn't look as polished. All right, and the objective of this video is to show how to do these things, these more complex things. So that's the reason why I'm doing it. So the first setting on my saw is to raise it up to 1/4 inch. Let's do that first. So we'll lift the blade. I'm using my finger to gauge the depth. And I know the saw is not, unplugged, but I've never seen a saw start itself. So anyway, so the other thing, I'm going to move this fence over. I know my blade thickness, the kerf of the blade, is a little bit more than a 1/16 of an inch. I already talked about that. It's a thin kerf blade. So I'm going to move my fence over to somewhere close to 5/16 because the total depth of cut that I want is 3/8. See, I'm going in 3/8 and on this side, and I'm going 1/4 inch deep on this side when my final cut. But I'm going to move my fence over to a little bit less than 5/16, say between 5/16 and 1/4 inch, and I'm going to make my first cut. And my first cut will tell me if my blade is up high enough or it needs to go back down, and also give me that width to see if that's correct. So once again, I'm going to take my tape and I'm going to look over the top of my glasses, even though these are bifocals, which I can't get used to, and check the depth, and it is exactly 1/4 inch. I'm using this part of the tape, and then I'll flip it over, and once again I'm looking over the top, and it's perfect. It's exactly 3/8 of an inch, so I got lucky there. Now the thing to remember when you're making this cut is where you're making the cut. Okay, so this is where you want these rabbets to be, up on the edge. So you have an 1/8 of an inch left over on the outside, and it goes 1/4 inch deep this way. So you need to orient the wood so that it's standing up like this, so you get this cut over here first, and you do that on both pieces. Okay, so we'll do that. Okay, so if you messed up here and you got it mixed up and you made the cut there, right? Make new pieces, right? What brought us to these parts already wasn't a huge amount of work. So it's not a big deal to make new parts. Just do that, all right? You got spare stock to work with. So these are correct, and you can see the way they're oriented. So these are the sides, the way they go. And then the top and bottom panel, see, it will fit in here like this once I cut this part away. And when you're doing this, you want to have the reference always the same for both things. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm not going to try to cut it away over here, even though it's supposedly safer, and it would be if you're making bigger, like if you're winding up with a bigger offcut. You don't want that trap between the fence and the blade, but it complicates the operation because these two pieces are different widths. So you want to have them the same. You want to have them oriented this way so that you wind up with the same cut, the same depth, in just one operation. You don't have to keep moving the fence and cutting samples, okay? So I'm gonna get my sample again, and I'm gonna move my fence over, and this time I'm gonna go in between, because it worked for the last one, I'm gonna go in between 1/8 of an inch and 3/16 of an inch. And I also need to raise up my blade. So I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna give it a couple of turns. And what I'll be able to do, since I've already cut this piece, this is my sample, I can use that to see how close I am. Looks like it's deep enough. It doesn't have to go all the way up because you've already cut in deep enough with the first cut. You've already cut in the full 1/4 inch. All you need to do is make sure that the cut depth is 1/4 inch, and it's not. I need to go deeper. So to go deeper, I actually move the fence away. So I've moved my fence over and I make the cut. Check the depth, and we're getting closer, okay? And the reason why I'm not going all the way to the end is because I want this outside here to measure off of, because you're looking for the depth this way, right? So you have that. And you know what? This is 1/4 inch. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to break this part off and take my panel and put it in here and see how it fits. And that's the ultimate test with your sample. Take the piece, and it's sticking up just a little bit, but I think that's good for sanding. Actually, the whole thing needs to be sanded, so rather than do that, I'm gonna move my fence just a very small amount again, and just a few thousandths of an inch, and make another cut. That's better. That's much better. Okay, it's completely flat and flush. So, sample. Do the sample. Don't be lazy. Lower the blade, raise the blade, make the sample. You won't regret it. It's very important. All right, so now this needs to be oriented correctly. You have to keep track of that because that's very easy to mix up too. Okay? So you need to remove this material inside here. So you put this side up against the fence, the piece down flat, you're making that cut. You're gonna have this little strip of wood between the blade and the fence. It's gonna shoot back, so move aside a little bit. This doesn't have the mass to kill you or anything, but just let it go, okay? It's not a deadly projectile. And the reason why I'm doing these while they're still long is because it's safer to cut longer pieces than it is to cut shorter ones. Okay, so when I put this in here, I can feel that there's a little bit of a lip, okay? A little bit of a lip inside there where the blade could cut a little bit deeper. One or the other, my blade didn't go deep enough, or this one doesn't. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna bump up and this a little bit higher and recut these parts. No big deal. Much better. Okay, there's no interference there whatsoever now. Okay, the other way to do this is to take a piece of sandpaper and sand the bottom edge so that you kind of bevel a little bit and it clears that little bit that was left over. But this is much cleaner. Okay, much more elegant, much more woodworking-ish. Okay, so that is a very important step done. Okay, now you can see how the box is starting to come together. Okay, because these are the side pieces, that's the top panel or bottom panel, and here's the way it goes together. Like so. Now I need to cut these to length, and to do that, they need to be the same length as this is from front to back, which is 3.5. So once again, I'll move my fence over, take my mini table saw sled back into action, and raise my blade so I'm making a cut through. And then neither end of this is very square. This is the rough end of the 2x6. So I'm just going to trim that off to begin with. I'm going to do that one at a time. And now remember, this is the piece for the bottom because it's narrower, and this is the piece for the top. I need two pieces cut from this that are 3.5 inches long. I need two pieces cut from this that are 3.5 long. So this is a good time to pull out the stop block, actually, and set that up. And that's easy enough. Put that over there. And I'm going to do it initially with the, actually I'm going to use the top or bottom panel to set that close like so, and then I'm going to take something, if I can find something, which I can't. Actually, no. I'm just going to move it over. How much do I like to cut a sample, all right? I'm not going to apologize for that. So here, on this, these are way longer than I need. So I can take this piece, put it up against the fence. Actually, I'm going to trim the end off so it's square first, and then I'm going to put it up against the fence. I'm going to cut that piece, and then I'll make an adjustment from there. Top and bottom panel, put it on there, see if it's the right length. It's very close. I need to move it over maybe a 30/2 of an inch. At this point, you can say, okay, you know, is it really that, you know, does it have to be that exact? Because you need to sand the ends here as well. And, you know, like, it doesn't have to be exact. So, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm just going to take this and I'm going to look for a landmark on my table saw to compare it to, and I'm just going to move that over just a very small amount. And then I'm going to take, it needed to be shorter, right? Yeah. And then I'm going to take my sample again, and I'm going to cut it again. Okay, you got time to do the sample. You got time to raise and lower the blade. Do these things. And you definitely have time to pull up your sleeves. Very important safety rule. Okay? That's much better. That is perfect, actually. Yes, very good. So here's my sample, which I can actually use as one of the pieces because it's very nice. Okay, so I'm going to cut one more of these. Okay, okay, no, it has a little, but you know, this needs to be beveled, so that's not a big deal. So I'm going to cut one more of these ones this width, and then I'm going to cut two of these. And I'm going to make sure that I put the piece that I cut square up against the stop. So whenever possible, you want to push it right through like I just did. Instead of going through, make your cut, and then pulling it back. You increase the risk of kickback when that happens. Anytime there's a piece of wood between the blade and something that doesn't move, there's a kickback situation. So pushing it all the way through until it's free, you take it up and then you pull the sled back empty. So here are the 4 pieces that I need for the sides, right? Here are the 2 pieces for the top and the bottom. And here is the piece that I'm going to cut the front and the back from. The next operation that I need to do is I need to cut these slots on the side, like on the ends of these, for that rabbet that's in the front and back panel. And those are actually further in, because the way I designed this, you know, if you're making this from softwood is very, very weak. Okay, we already demonstrated how it's weak. So I'm actually going to be putting the front and back panel in further. They're not going to be out flush with the end. And what that'll give me is more meat on the end here to add a little bit more strength. So I'm going to be coming in about 1/8 of an inch from the front. You can come in even further. You know, it depends on how you want the box to look. Right? But I'm going to come in about 1/8 of an inch, which will be 1/4 inch from the end. So doing this with the fence, you can move the fence over to 1/4 inch and you can make those cuts like that. It's safe, but it would actually work out better if you did it with the mini table saw sled instead. Move the stop block over so you're cutting 1/4 inch. And the way to do that is just line it up there, and then I'll take a piece of the top and bottom that I broke off and stick it in there just as a gauge and get it close. Because once again, I'm going to be cutting a sample. If I can get a tooth here. Okay, so we'll get it close with the block, like so. Tighten that up. Check again to make sure it didn't move. And that looks close. And then I've got this piece, like these are the pieces I need to keep. Keep those over there. I can take this piece and I can make a sample cut. Once again, I need to lower the blade because I'm only going in about 1/8 of an inch. Although this depth that you're cutting here is not really that critical. It just needs to fit this slot. It has to be deep enough to accommodate this tongue, I guess you could say, on the end of the front and back panel. So lower the blade and make a sample cut. And what I'm looking for, you could line this up any way you like, because, okay, the front and back, you know, that's not really that important either. All you're going to be left with is it being closer to the front or further in, right? So don't get hung up on getting out the calipers and measuring this, right? What you want to do is take your piece and put it up to that cut that you just made to make sure it's the right depth, because it has to be at least the depth that this thing is. So you take the rabbeted part, you put it up against the edge, and you look up there, and you can utilize your bifocals, and you can see, you should be able to see through a little bit. Anyway, this is not deep enough. So I need to raise my blade, and I'm going to do that there, and I'm going to make another sample cut. Perfect. I wish I could show you what I'm seeing here. When you take this and you put it up there, you can see in the very bottom of this cut that I made, you can see daylight. You can see light shining through. That means that it's just the right depth to receive this. However, as you can see, it's not the right width, okay? It needs to be made wider for the thing, because this is 1/8 of an inch. The blade is not cutting a full 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to make that cut that I just made on all 4 pieces, making sure, because this is very important, that it's on the inside. Okay, don't put it on the outside. The outside would be bad. Put it on the inside. So it's always oriented so the side is down. Okay, the narrow side is down. Remember that. Position your wood. The next one you grab, make it so that it's in the right orientation. I'm saying this thing, it sounds obvious, but this is how people mess up. How I've messed up so many times. Both ends. You're cutting both ends. All four are cut. Now I need to make it wider. And I take my piece and I can line it up. I'm going to move my block away a little bit to do that. And that'll push this cut in further, right? So it'll reduce the size inside here. You can push it out if you want, get it closer. If you want the front panel closer to the front, you can do that. Or you can push it in a little bit further. The way I lined this up to begin with is that it was like this is the face of this that goes up against the cut that I just made. That's difficult to understand, but you'll get what I mean in a second when I actually make the cut. So I'm just gonna move my block over. And the way I'm doing this is I'm looking down at the table saw top and I'm looking for, something to eyeball it against. I need to move it over less than a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm just seeing a little speck of dust there, and I'm just going to move that over by that 1/16 of an inch, and then I'm not going to cut those. I'm going to cut my sample again. Wasn't deep enough. It wasn't wide enough. I didn't move it enough. So I just moved again, make another cut. We're almost there. If anything, I want it to be a little bit sloppy. I'm being a little bit too precise with this. Like I was just doing this, I have it done already, but I want to show you how you sneak up on things, right? If you're looking for an absolute perfect fit here, you just don't, move it over a certain amount and just slap it together. You got to be careful, all right? You have to be methodical. You have to do it this way, move it slightly. And you have to have develop a feel for moving things slightly. All right, so reposition my sample again, make another cut. Excellent. Excellent. I'm just going to take my panel and slide it all the way through to make sure I've got a good fit there. It's a good, just slight friction fit, which is excellent. Here it's a little bit tighter, but it's a little bit too tight on this side actually. So this piece must be a little bit thicker on this end than it is over here. So I can either sand this side, which I'm not going to do, or I can move it over again and make another sample cut. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go a little bit there, make a cut. Got good there, and we're good there, okay? That's all it takes. You just need to have a little bit of patience. You need to be methodical about things, and not in a big rush, okay? No fine woodworking is done in a rush. Okay, so perfect, good fit. Now I can take all of my pieces again. I can take that sample, throw it over there. I can take that, keep that here. This is the other sample, throw that over there. I don't need to be confused. And I'm going to make all these cuts again. Once again, I'm going to orient the pieces the way they should be, so they're facing down. When I make the cuts, I won't get confused. Not a bad idea to check. Okay, everything looks good. So there we go. These parts are ready now for assembly. And assembly is to glue these onto this, like so. Okay, and you want to clamp that up and let it dry. And that's what I'm going to do, except I'm going to do that part off camera because it's cold in my shop. I'm going to have to bring this in my house where it's warm and where regular wood glue will work, and I'll be able to, you know, work on it again in about an hour and give my battery a chance to charge up because it's almost dead. So glue this to this as shown, and glue this to this in exactly the same way. Okay, and you can see the slots are on the inside where they need to be. Now the other thing, okay, it shows in my drawing that the front of this is beveled. Okay, and that kind of makes it look cooler. And you can do that now before you put it together, or you can do it after. I'm just gonna do it after. I'm just gonna take a piece of sandpaper on a sanding block and sand that down so it's beveled. Because, okay, if you try to cut this now, like I said, this is very weak on the front here. That's the reason why I made it deeper, to improve the, to increase the strength. If you try to cut that now, it could break. Better to, like, you set it up so you can cut it afterwards, but the easiest way is just to sand it. Especially with softwood like this, you can sand that down really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then I'll be back after the glue dries. Oh, the other thing I should point out, okay, see what I did here? This is one of the wider ones, and this is a narrow one. Don't get those confused. Otherwise, you're going to have a weird looking box, okay? Put the narrow with the narrow, okay? That's also very important. Okay, I'm back, and I've got these glued up. I gave it about an hour to dry. I had lunch, so you can see here. Not a lot to it. I just use one spring clamp on each end, clamp it down nice and tight. And when I put the glue in there, I put it in along the bottom and along the end as well. So completely fill the glue, you know. And when, like, before I walked away from it, I cleaned the glue out, or as much as I could, from these slots in here that squeezed out when I put it together. Now I can take my thing that makes up the front and back panel and see how it fits. And right away I can see it's a little bit tight. Okay, so let's see if it actually fits between. No, it's not that far off, but it won't go in there. Okay, so looks like I got to recut this. And even though I wasn't, you know, shooting for that, I didn't want it to happen. It's a good thing to show. Okay. So what I'll do is, already the blade is down from cutting these things. So it needs to go lower though, I think. So I'll just put it down lower and move this over until it's just kissing the blade. And what I mean is that when I push it through, it's grabbing on this lower edge that you see here, because this is what I need to cut back a little bit. I need to cut this back a little bit and I need to cut this a little bit shorter as well. So I'm just pushing it through while I move the, see right there, it's just grabbing the blade. It's just grabbing the blade. And I'm gonna lower it a little bit more actually and make a test cut. Okay, I could use my sample, but it's a different width, you see? So I need to do this on the piece itself. So I'm just gonna make a cut now and see how it looks. And remember, you have to push down on it in the middle. I don't see anything and I didn't hear anything, so that means that it's either not cutting at all or it's just grazing past it. So I'm going to move my fence over, very small amount, and make another cut. That time I went halfway, just so I could compare it to this side over here. And I can see that it actually was cutting a little bit. As for if it's deep enough, it's definitely not deep enough, but it could go wider too because it's still not fitting in there at all. Okay, so I'll move my fence a little bit more. Some of you are probably saying, wow, is this ever tedious? But you know what, man? That's woodworking. Woodworking can be tedious. All right, the cut I made there, very obvious, but it's still not a good fit. Let me try it on the other one. They're supposed to be exactly the same. So yeah, I'm gonna move it over a little bit more. And this time I'm gonna raise my blade as well because I'm definitely not cutting deep enough. Okay, now what I have is the correct width. All right, so I'm just cutting one side, by the way. You know, you saw that. I'm leaving the other side as it is, but now I have it so that it'll actually fit in there. And it's good fit. It should be there should be a little bit of play there. But I'm still not deep enough. I need to come up a little bit higher. And I go with another cut. Okay, that's good. I've got to cut to the correct depth because when I put it back in here, it's sitting down flat all the way across. Now, it's still a bit too long, right? I cut the rabbit deeper this way. I need to trim a little bit off the other side. So I'm gonna keep my blade where, like, as high as it is right now, and I'm just gonna trim a little bit off the other side. A little bit of lint on there I can sand off, and now we can try it back in the, and it fits in there really nice. Okay, and that's the way it's supposed to fit. It's supposed to slip right in there without having to pound it in. Okay, it's a little bit tight over on this side, but if you have a little bit of interference at this point, all you need to do is a little bit of sanding. Right? This is a good sanding block to have. It's just a block of hardwood, nice and flat, with a piece of sandpaper. This is 100 grit, double-sided, taped or even spray glued onto it, and it doesn't have anything on the edge here, so it rubs up against the shoulder and it doesn't mess things up. So you sand a little bit and that improves the fit, so it goes in there nice. Okay, so now we have that done. We can put the two halves of the box, halves or halves? halves actually sounds better, doesn't it? Okay, let's say top and bottom. Put the top and bottom together like this, and then we can get the size that the thing needs to be, right? So we can measure that. And I'm going to use my tape. I'm going to use the 1 inch mark again, put it up against here, and it's just a bit more, it's just a bit less actually than 1.5. Okay, so I'm going to set my saw to 1.5 minus a little bit. Sounds very scientific, I know. And raise my blade, so I'm just cutting through the stock, and here's where you have to have the experience to do what I'm about to do. I'm going to hold this with my fingers, all right? But I know that looks clumsy, and it doesn't instill confidence. But the way I'm holding it is with my 2 fingers here like this, up against the fence. I'm pushing it against the fence. My other fingers are up like these two, right, that I don't really need. But anyway, so they're up on top of the fence, and this one is like guiding along. Everything's far away from the blade, okay? And then the blade is not sticking up high either. It's just high enough to cut through this 1/4 inch material. So let's make the cut and cross our other fingers. See, I didn't have my sleeves pulled up. Okay, so this, I don't know if it's the right length yet, but I can see it's a little bit snug in there too. So a little bit more tuning with the sanding block. Okay, like that. Slip it in, and then take the other side and put that on. And if it doesn't go tight together, I've got maybe a 30-inch gap here. That means that you need to cut a little bit more off. So I'm going to move my fence over by that much. And once again, this doesn't have to be a perfect fit, okay? If this doesn't, if there's a little bit of a gap between the top of this panel and the bottom of the top, that's fine. Okay, but I'm just showing you how to get there if you want it perfect. Put it back in again and try it again. And now this is looking a lot better. I think this is actually, no, a little bit more. I'm going to take a little bit more off. Very small amount. And I'm doing all this on the first piece, so I won't have to do it on the second piece. Now that I have the size exactly, precisely correct on this one, I can cut this one, and it'll fit, right? Just need to figure out which side looks best, which end, and we'll go with that. Okay, so you can see how this works. Okay, so this will be the top. That's the wider piece. And then you take your panels, cut the holes in there that you need or whatever. Once again, I need to do a little bit of sanding on this to clean it up a bit, make it a better fit. And then you put the rest of your stuff inside here that you need to put in, and then you take the bottom and you put that on. And it should fit either way, okay? I'm putting it on that way and it fits. You should be able to flip it around and it'll fit the same because the box is symmetrical and all the cuts are symmetrical and everything lines up flush on the ends and it's looking pretty darn good. So what I would do next, let's just look it over and make sure everything's good. I need to put a couple of screws in here. A box this size doesn't need 4 screws, okay? It just needs two. Put them centered here. All right, because, you know, that's another part of woodworking, is figuring out where you need the strength. And you can put 4 screws in here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to mark the center. So 3.5 is 1 3/4 right here and on the other side. And I'm going to come in 1/4 inch, because that's the center of the 1/2 inch side panels, right? You want it centered as centered as possible. Mark that on both sides. And then a good place to drill that would be the drill press, and it's probably the only place for me because I don't have a drill out here. Okay, I'm looking around, I don't see one. But you want to drill a pilot hole the correct size for the screws that you're going to use. You'll also want to drill a counterbore for the head of the screw. Not a counterbore, a countersink. Well, you can do a counterbore if you're using a different kind, like a pan head screw. Okay, so countersink, I would do the countersink first, because that's just the way I do things. And then I drill the pilot hole, and you want to make sure that the pilot hole is actually longer than the screw, and the right size for the screw. For a number 6 screw, I think I use a 3/32, but I'm not sure. I'll have to look and check. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this over there and do that drilling off camera, because you guys have seen lots of drilling before. You don't need to see me. You don't need to watch me doing that. And then we'll screw it together, and we'll do the final shaping and sanding on the box. Okay. Oh no, I forgot that I'm supposed to bevel the inside here as well, right? So to do that, you just take it and put it down on the back or on the bottom, whatever, and take your block, your sanding block, and just angle it at 45 degrees. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get out the protractor and measure the angle. Just eyeball 45 degrees, and you sand it, okay, until it looks like it's enough. And that looks pretty good. I'll check it out. I mean, no, you can go a little bit more. Just sand that. Once you have the first one done, then you do the rest and just make it look like that. That's all. So I'm going to finish sanding these. I'm going to drill it out, and then I'll be back to driving the screws. I've got the countersinks and the pilot holes drilled, and I located a couple of 1.5" number 6 screws. My screwdriver to put them in. But before I put the box together, I'm just going to take it apart again. And here's what you need to do, though. You need to index these, because after these holes are drilled, it's not going to be symmetrical anymore. It really doesn't matter how careful you are lining up these holes. Unless you're doing it on a CNC, it's very unlikely that they're going to line up from one side to the other. So what I like to do is just put an X on there and an X over here. And that way I can just take it and look at both things and line it up and put it where it's supposed to go. Put it in the correct orientation, okay? I'm assuming I have it right. Yeah, no, it looks good. Anyway, so you can take it apart, and I'm going to sand these faces just slightly. Probably going to get rid of the X that I just put on there, but I'll put it back, okay? Just going to flatten them. It doesn't, you don't have to do a lot of sanding here, just, you know, a little bit, flatten it. And you can do any sanding you want to on the inside too as well. And I don't think I need to. The inside of this box really doesn't matter what it looks like. So I'll put my X back, and then I'll take the front panel out. And the front panel is smooth, but it has those lines that I drew on it. So I'll sand that as well. Okay, I'm gonna get all the sanding done at this point on the parts before you put the box together. You'll do more sanding after. Let's see, you make that nice and clean, and you can sand it on the inside too, but once again, I'm not going to do that. Put that in there, and I'll do the same on the other piece. And sand this face. Now might be a good time to ask you what you think of this kind of video. because now which side did I sand? It was this one I sanded, because this one looks pretty clean. Anyway, I'll sand it anyway. Right. Make sure it's nice and flat. That's good, and I'll put my X back. All right, so that's the sanding that I need to do on the inside. I already sanded those bevels. Like I said, it's not a big deal. You don't have to do it. It's just for looks. And then I'll take this and I will put it together. And once again, I'll check to make sure it's going together properly all the way around. Still looks good, because if you have to cut the panels again, you can do that. All right, now the way this is oriented, with the grain going this way and the grain going that way, with expansion and contraction, wood shrinks and expands. With seasonal moisture changes in the air, wood expands and contracts, and that's the way it would do it. It'd get taller in the summer, shorter in the winter, but there's no conflicts here. The grain's going in the direction, same direction all the way around. So flip it over, find my screws again, and drive these in. Now this would be a lot easier if I had to drill out the holes on this side, the bottom, oversized, so this screw just goes in, and then I only have to drive it into this part up here. And you can see the length compared to the thing. It's sticking into the upside, like the top part, by almost a ½ inch. Okay, so more than enough holding power. So I'm just gonna get these driven in. The upside of driving them in through the bottom so that they're tight is that you will not lose them as easily. Okay, all you need to do is back them off, like back them out about a ½ inch, and then you can take the box apart again, change whatever you need to change in there. There's going to be batteries inside here, so that's the thing that I would need to change, and then you're not losing the screws. So that's the advantage of doing it that way. Okay, so the box is fully assembled and it's looking pretty sharp. I just need to finish the sanding on here. And it's a good idea to do that once the box is assembled, right? Because then you can make everything nice and flush, right? And like I said, you can bevel these corners. Do that with a sanding block. I'm actually going to do it now because pushing it up against this here, that's going to mark that, and I haven't sanded that yet, so I'll sand out those marks after, when I'm sanding the top and the bottom. Right, so you just make a slight bevel on here. It's just for looks. Don't need to do it. And you know, the same thing on the edges. Just ease them over. The amount of sanding you do here is entirely up to you. Along the front, same thing. Sand that nice and flush. And eventually where you get is you get a box that's nice and clean, and it looks like it's very precisely put together. And you know, you did the sanding in here to make those bevels. Once you put the box together, if you see that they're partly not lined up, a good way to even them out is to take the box apart again, take out these panels, put the box together, and then just sand that again so that they, you know, become flush. And it looks really good. Okay. So that's it. That's woodworking step by step, right? As long as you approach a project, doesn't matter how complex it is, as long as you've got the time and the patience, and patience is really something you need for woodworking, you'll get it done. You'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes. It's how you deal with the mistakes that's important, right? You throw it down on the floor and jump on it and smash it up and get all kinds of angry. Or you can say, okay, I know how to fix that. Very much like those panels that didn't fit. I know how to fix that. If they were too small, I would have made new ones.